welcome. You're watching Head to Head. I'm Antonina Antosha with UA TV. Investment attractiveness of Ukraine largely depends on the state's success in combating corruption. So, setting up the Business-Ombudsman Council was a major step forward towards the improvement of Ukraine's investment climate. So, what has been achieved so far and what remains to be done to protect businesses in Ukraine? To talk more about this, we're joined in the studio today by Iaroslav Gregirchak, Deputy Business Ombudsman of Ukraine. Hello and thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me, Antonina.
So let's talk about Ukrainian investment attractiveness first of all. It's not a secret that there is a lot of fake information surrounding the investment attractiveness of Ukraine, mainly coming from Russia in saying that Ukraine is absolutely not attractive for investors since we have the war going on in the east for the fifth consecutive year. Is it true or not? Because other information proves that there is investment flow and there are reimbursements in Ukraine. So what would you say?
That would not be appropriate to discontinue the war factor when it comes to assessment of Ukraine's investment attractiveness, but the situation is evolving. Reforms are being put in place. There are certain studies that has been published recently, for instance, aimed at assessing the economic impact of the anti-corruption reform in various sectors, starting from gas, state procurement, etc. And those estimations says that at least $6 billion are being generated annually for Ukraine as a positive economic impact of those anti-corruption reforms. So, here is the battle of arguments. The economic appraisal vis-a-vis what we call the corruption perception factor, and the latter is quite a subjective exercise.
What about the fact that Ukraine is about to be granted €1 billion from the EU as the part of the deal between Ukraine and the IMF? Now, is that playing a vital role in Ukrainian investment attractiveness for the investors from abroad?
Yes, both as far as the particular disbursement is concerned, because if disbursements are being made, funds are released, that means ostensibly that the conditions precedent for a particular disbursement are fulfilled. But it also has a greater impact on those that are sitting in there and are watching what's happening in between Ukraine and IMF, because that itself is a conditionality for other investors, both institutional and international financial institutions, to consider continuing investing in Ukraine.
In general, what would you call or how would you evaluate the investment business, the investment image of Ukraine these days?
It's kind of an ironic question, because you're asking someone who is operating as a deputy in an institution that is aimed at resolving problematic situations between business and government.
I'm calling for your specialist evaluation.
Well, I'm saying that the situation is certainly evolving, right? We've got to make right comparisons. We've got to pick up a particular sector and see what has been achieved. How does the situation look like back in 2014, let's say, and where we are right now? And, amongst all this nervousness and lack of certain internal trust sometimes in between those that are determining the state of play in this country. Let's sit down quietly from time to time and ascertain with a sober state of mind and let's not underestimate what has been achieved. The situation is moving on.
So we're in
Ukraine's, what are the real, where are the sectors where I would claim there is a real progress?
That was my next question. Speaking of sectors, which are the areas that are the most attractive for foreign investors and which are the ones that leave much to be desired, let's say?
I attend various events where, again, I speak mostly about how successful we are in terms of resolving disputes between business and government in a pre-trial manner. That's our main mandate. But the sectors that are being mentioned and which I hear are on top of many people's discussion is, of course, agriculture, it's IT sector, it's food processing, it's, hopefully those areas that are capable of generating as much of the value added as possible.
What is the Business-Ombudsman Council?
Business-Ombudsman Council is the body that is not vested with any binding authority, but which, by virtue of our reputational leverage, is resolving disputes or those instances that we call business malpractices that arise in a relationship between business and governmental authorities of all types. And as any ombudsman institution, we operate on the basis of independency, impartiality. We are equally distanced from both business and government. We are not enemies for the state authorities, yet we are also not the part of the complainant's legal team. And this almost 3.5 years while we remain operational since May 2015 proves that this experiment to create such an institution in the conditions of post-Soviet Slavic jurisdiction is actually working quite well if this aspect of reputational leverage is structured properly. And it is. We've been set up by 3 groups of parties, government of Ukraine, EBRD, OECD, and 5 local business associations. Effectively, everyone who is in this landscape determining relationship between businesses and government are included. So this sense of inclusiveness and I guess the quality of personnel that is working there under leadership of Algirdas Šemeta, who is the former EU commissioner, is producing results, I would say fascinating results. About 4,500 complaints has been lodged with us since May 2015.
Is that a lot?
Depends upon what are the context in which you are comparing, but it's quite a lot for us to be able to come up with certain generalizations
How many
based
of
on
those
our
complaints
status.
have been resolved?
I tell you what, our main tool while interacting with state authorities, since we don't have binding authority, right, is to issue recommendations to them. We call them individual recommendations. I would argue that more than 1,500 of those recommendations has been issued, and the rate of fulfillment is just fascinating. It's far more than 80%. And the direct financial impact, believe it or not, stemming from our involvement, and for the avoidance of doubt, this is not any kind of KPI in our activity, is exceeding 13 billion hryvnias.
Now that is impressive. What is Ukrainian business? What is this thing that Ukrainian businessmen usually complain about?
Traditional question.
Of course.
About 50%, if I were to aggregate the data that we generated since May 2015, about 50% are the different types of misconduct on the part of fiscal authorities, including customs and tax police. Some 15% are all types of law enforcers, national police, prosecutors, state security service, and about 12 to 15% are instances of business misconduct on the part of the bodies of the local self-governments, right? City, village councils, oblast administrations, etc.
Speaking of which, how has the situation in the business sphere in Ukraine changed after the decentralization reform has been implemented? How did the role of state authorities and the local authorities change in the sphere?
Well, it's a good question that merits probably a bit more in-depth study, but I would argue that perhaps we just started to receive a bit more complaints lodged against bodies of the local self-governance. And again, we are just sitting there fulfilling our mandate. We are generating inadvertently our statistics, and the way how you interpret these statistics is in itself quite a subjective exercise as well, because businesses tend to argue that you are receiving more complaints because the pressure is rising. But if you were to ask a kind of a typical state official, the answer would be, no, you guys are becoming much more visible and well-known and trustworthy at the part of the business. And just because of that, there is an effect that triggers increase of the number of complaints. But I wouldn't say that the number of complaints right now is on the rise. I would say to the contrary. We saw a dramatic increase of the number of complaints by their sheer number back in midsummer last year. And that was on the one fiscal topic, which is suspension of registration of VAT invoices. Sorry for getting into many technicalities. But since the issue is being resolved, we are more or less on a plateau right now. We are even, I would say, increasing with the number of complaints. And
what about the fact that there is a ban currently operating on inspecting businesses in Ukraine, and it's going to be operating until the end of 2018?
Well, we've been operating under this legal framework in this kind of environment more or less since we became operational. So we are yet to see what's going to happen with our statistics as this ban is going to be lifted eventually.
I'm guessing you're going to see an increase in the number of complaints.
Yes, ostensibly.
You're waiting. You're already waiting for it, right?
We're always ready. Yeah, we are there. That's the part of our job, of course.
Thank you so much for coming and clarifying the whole situation for us.
It was my pleasure, Anastasia.
That was Iaroslav Gregirchak. He's a deputy business-омбудсмен of Ukraine. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned with UATV for more.